It was the kind of prayer you only make when you've reached the end of your rope. The kind of prayer that comes not from a place of faith, but from a place of desperation. In the quiet of her small apartment, Sarah Thompson clutched the crumpled letter in her hands. She had written it the night before, pouring her heart out with every word, hoping, praying that somehow it would reach the one person who could make a difference, Michael Jordan. Could he, of all people, help save her? For Sarah, this wasn't just about a basketball injury. It was about her son's dreams, and about the promise she made to him years ago, when the world seemed full of hope. Now, with the weight of the world on her shoulders, she was clinging to a fragile thread. A thread that connected her to a man who once soared higher than anyone ever thought possible, Michael Jordan. And in her heart, the struggle of a single mother. Sarah Thompson had lived a life of unrelenting sacrifice, always giving more than she had, stretching herself thinner with each passing year. She had never known anything else. From the moment she had held her son Marcus in her arms, she knew her life would never be the same. But it wasn't just the joy of motherhood that had shaped her. It was the struggle, the constant fight against the tide that seemed to pull her under. As a single mother living in a small, cramped apartment in one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, Sarah had learned early on that nothing came easily. Her ex-husband, Robert, had walked out of their lives when Marcus was barely 2. The note he left behind was simple, almost cold. "I can't do this. I'm gone." The rest of the world seemed to crumble around her, and Sarah had to put the pieces back together. By herself, she'd tried her best to shield Marcus from the hurt, from the emptiness that came with a missing father, but it was hard. She was just one person, and there was only so much she could carry. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. During the day, she worked as a cashier at Target, ringing up items and greeting customers with a smile that hid the exhaustion in her bones. The hours were long, the pay barely enough to cover the rent, and the energy she poured into the job seemed to slip through her fingers. At night, she was a waitress at a local diner, running back and forth, taking orders, refilling drinks, and doing her best to make people laugh, while her body screamed for rest. She had no time for herself, no time to dream. All her energy went into providing for Marcus, and in those rare moments when she did manage to sit down, it was spent doing the bills. The bills never stopped coming. Sarah's apartment was modest, just enough room for the 2 of them. The walls were thin and the ceilings cracked, but it was their home. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and in Sarah's eyes, that was all that mattered. It was during these quiet moments, after Marcus had gone to bed, that Sarah would sit at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she sorted through the pile of overdue bills, the weight of them pressed down on her chest. $200 here, $300 there, medical bills, rent, utilities. Every single letter seemed to come with a red stamp that shouted, "Past due." She'd open them one by one, trying to figure out how to make everything fit. The thing that hurt most wasn't the constant fear of being behind. It was the fact that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many hours she put in, she couldn't keep up. The dream of giving Marcus a better life, of providing him with opportunities that she never had, felt further and further out of reach. She thought about all the things she had promised him. She had promised that he would go to college, that he would play basketball for as long as he wanted, that he would be better than anyone else. But every time she looked at him, she saw the weight of his dreams pressing against him, and she knew she was failing him. And then came the injury. A torn ACL, the doctors said. It was supposed to be something that could be fixed, an operation, some rehab, and Marcus would be back on the court in no time. But nothing had prepared Sarah for how this would break them, how it would affect every aspect of their already fragile life. Basketball was Marcus's life. It was the one thing that made sense to him, the one thing that gave him hope. He had always been a natural. At just 12 years old, he was already taller than most of the boys his age, his body a perfect fit for the game. But that knee injury had stolen his dream, and with it, a piece of Sarah's heart. As the days passed, Sarah found herself drowning. She couldn't pay the bills, she couldn't get the surgery Marcus needed, and she couldn't provide him with the hope he so desperately clung to. In the silence of their small apartment, as the weight of her failure pressed in on her, she began to wonder if she could do this alone. Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe this was a dream too big for her to carry. But Sarah had never been one to give up easily. She had never been one to let the weight of the world crush her. It wasn't in her nature. So with every passing day, as the bills piled up and Marcus's pain increased, she found herself in a constant battle. A battle to keep going. A battle to keep the dream alive for Marcus, even when she couldn't see how it was possible. But how long could she keep fighting? How long could she keep pretending everything was going to be okay when she was falling apart inside? It was in this darkest hour, as Sarah sat at that kitchen table surrounded by the reminders of her struggle, that she made a decision. It was a decision that felt reckless, a decision born out of desperation. She decided to reach out to the one person who might understand. Michael Jordan. The man who had defied the odds, who had been cut from his high school team, but still became the greatest basketball player of all time. If there was anyone who could understand, it was him. He had overcome his own obstacles, his own setbacks, and maybe, just maybe, he would hear her plea and help. But even as Sarah wrote the letter, she knew the odds were against her. She knew it was a long shot. But sometimes when you have nothing left to lose, you take the shot anyway. Marcus's dreams at risk. Marcus Thompson had always been a dreamer. From the moment he could walk, he had a basketball in his hand, his tiny fingers grasping it with a determination that was rare for someone so young. His mother often smiled as she watched him dribble up and down the hallway, his feet a blur, his mind already imagining himself playing in arenas filled with cheering crowds. To him, basketball was more than just a game. It was his future. It was a way out, a way to prove to the world that he could rise above his circumstances, that he could do something extraordinary despite the odds stacked against him. And perhaps most importantly, it was a way to make his mother proud. He had always admired Michael Jordan. To Marcus, Jordan wasn't just the greatest basketball player ever. He was a symbol of perseverance, a living testament to the idea that anyone, no matter where they came from, could overcome adversity. Jordan had been cut from his high school team, yet he became the embodiment of success in the world of basketball. To Marcus, Jordan represented the dream, the proof that no matter how far down you had fallen, you could always rise again. But now, as Marcus lay on the couch, nursing the pain in his knee, his dreams seemed further out of reach than ever before. The doctors had told him that he had torn his ACL, a devastating injury that threatened to put an end to his budding basketball career. At just 12 years old, Marcus was already a prodigy, his potential unmistakable. But that potential was now locked inside a body that couldn't move the way it used to. His knee throbbed with pain every day, the injury a constant reminder that his dreams could be slipping through his fingers. Marcus was a fighter, but even he couldn't deny the weight of the uncertainty that hung over him. Without the surgery he needed, the doctors warned, he might never play basketball again. They didn't sugarcoat it. It was a hard truth to swallow, especially when Marcus had never faced a challenge like this before. His mother had always told him that if he worked hard enough, if he pushed through the pain and kept his head down, there was nothing he couldn't achieve. But now, there was no amount of effort that could fix his knee. It wasn't something he could will into healing with sheer determination. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the fear that came with it. Fear that his dreams were slipping away. Fear that all the hours spent practicing, all the sacrifices, all the games where he'd given everything he had, it would all be for nothing. He could no longer keep up with his teammates. The other boys at school who once looked up to him now started to surpass him. His basketball posters on the walls of his room, filled with images of NBA greats like Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, and LeBron James, seemed to mock him now. They were symbols of a future he wasn't sure he could reach anymore. Even more painful was the look in his mother's eyes when she talked about the surgery. She was working herself to exhaustion just to keep the bills paid, and now she was carrying the weight of Marcus's medical expenses as well. Marcus could see it in her face, this constant, unspoken anxiety. She was trying to stay strong, trying to protect him from the reality of their situation. But Marcus wasn't blind. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, hear the cracks in her voice when she reassured him that everything would be okay. He knew she was doing everything she could, but that didn't make it any easier. Despite all the love and encouragement his mother had given him, Marcus couldn't ignore the harsh reality of their situation. The GoFundMe page they had started had only raised a paltry $127. No one was donating. No one seemed to care about a 12-year-old kid from the south side of Chicago who had a busted knee. He couldn't help but feel like he was just another kid from a forgotten neighborhood, another statistic in a world that had already written him off. But even as the doubt crept in, Marcus refused to give up. He had always been the type of kid who didn't back down from a challenge, and basketball had been the one thing that always made sense to him. When he was on the court, nothing else mattered. The pain in his knee didn't matter, the exhaustion didn't matter, nothing but the ball, the court, and the game mattered. Yet every time he tried to push through, his knee reminded him that he couldn't outrun reality. He had always been told that he was special, that he had a gift. But now, as he hobbled around with crutches, he began to wonder if that was all just a dream. He wanted to believe that he could still play again. He wanted to believe that he could make it to the NBA, that one day scouts would be watching him, just like they had when he'd won the city championship last year. But how could that happen if he couldn't even walk properly? The weight of it all, his injury, his mother's sacrifice, the uncertainty of his future, was unbearable at times. But Marcus still found the strength to smile, to put on a brave face when his mother walked into the room. He didn't want her to see his fear, his uncertainty. He didn't want her to know how much he doubted his ability to ever play again. He wanted to be strong for her, just like she had always been strong for him. It was in these quiet moments, in the darkness of his bedroom as he lay on his bed staring at his basketball trophies, that Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. His mother had given everything for him, and the least he could do was keep fighting for his dream. But this time he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her too, for all the sacrifices she had made for him, for the love she had given him when there was nothing else. And that's when the thought hit him. He couldn't do this alone. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. What if the greatest player who had ever lived, the man who had been cut from his high school team but still made it to the top, could help? What if Michael Jordan, the man who had overcome every obstacle to become a legend, could understand? What if he could help? And so, with trembling hands and a heart full of hope, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would write a letter. A letter to Michael Jordan. A letter that he wasn't sure would even be read, but he had to try. It wasn't just a letter for himself. It was a letter for his mother, for their future. He had nothing left to lose. The letter to Michael Jordan. The idea came to Marcus like a sudden, unexpected light in the darkness. He had been staring at his basketball posters, his gaze lingering on the image of Michael Jordan soaring through the air, his legs extended mid-dunk, the crowd below him in a frenzy. It was one of Marcus's favorite images, a snapshot of Jordan at his peak, the epitome of grace, power, and success. To Marcus, it wasn't just a photo. It was a symbol of everything he aspired to be. But as he looked at the photo now, surrounded by the trophies that had once symbolized his own budding potential, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if those dreams were slipping away. The pain in his knee was constant, an unwelcome reminder that his future was uncertain. No matter how many hours he spent watching old games of Jordan, studying his footwork, his moves, the way he handled adversity, nothing seemed to change the reality that Marcus couldn't even walk without crutches. His dreams of playing in high school, of earning a college scholarship, of one day entering the NBA, it all seemed too distant now. Each day brought him closer to the edge of losing everything he had worked for. But as Marcus sat in his dimly lit room, the quiet weight of his frustration pressing down on him, the thought struck him again. What if Michael Jordan could help? Jordan had overcome far more than Marcus could ever imagine. He had been cut from his high school basketball team, a humiliating experience that could have shattered anyone's dreams. But Jordan didn't give up. He worked harder, pushed himself to the limit, and came back better than ever. Jordan had faced his own setbacks, and through sheer willpower he had risen above them. He was living proof that dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed, could come true if you didn't give up. Marcus had heard his mother tell him that story countless times, how Jordan had been overlooked, underestimated, yet ultimately became the greatest basketball player in history. And every time she told him that story, Marcus felt something stir inside him. He felt a connection to Jordan, even though they were separated by so much. They were both from Chicago. They had both faced challenges, and Marcus had to believe that maybe, just maybe, Jordan would understand. The thought of reaching out to Jordan terrified Marcus. He knew how many letters the legend must have received over the years. Thousands, perhaps millions from fans, from kids like him, dreaming of a moment of connection. Who was he, just a 12-year-old with a broken knee, to ask for help from someone as big as Michael Jordan? What were the chances that his letter would even be read, let alone answered? But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was his only chance. With a heavy heart and a mind filled with a mixture of hope and doubt, Marcus opened his laptop. The screen flickered on and he stared at it for a moment, unsure where to start. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, the weight of his words pressing down on him. What do you say to someone who could change everything? What do you say to the person you've idolized for years, the person who might be able to save your future? He started typing slowly, unsure of where to begin, but the words began to flow as the reality of his situation set in. "Dear Mr. Jordan," he wrote, his fingers trembling as he typed. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 12 years old, and basketball is my life. It was my life until I tore my ACL, and now I might never be able to play again." As he typed, Marcus found himself pouring out his heart. He told Jordan about the injury, about the doctors who had warned him that the surgery he needed was critical, but that his mother couldn't afford it. He told Jordan about his mother, Sarah, about how she worked 2 jobs to support him, how she was doing everything she could, but how it still wasn't enough. He spoke of the sacrifices she had made and how he couldn't bear the thought of letting her down. He wrote about his dreams of playing basketball in high school, of earning a scholarship, and how all of that seemed impossible now. He described the endless nights of pain, the crutches that were now a part of his daily life, and the uncertainty that clouded his future. But above all, he wrote about his love for the game and how he wasn't ready to give up yet. He wanted to get better. He wanted to be strong again. He wanted the chance to prove to the world and to himself that he could overcome this. When Marcus finished the letter, he stared at the screen for a long time. He read it over and over again, each word feeling more vulnerable than the last. He felt exposed, like he was sharing a piece of himself that he had never shared with anyone. This wasn't just a plea for help. It was a confession of his deepest fears, his hopes, and his dreams. He hesitated for a moment. Could he really send this? Was it foolish to think that someone like Michael Jordan would care about a kid like him? But in that moment, Marcus realized something. This wasn't just about basketball. It wasn't just about the surgery or his knee or even his dreams of playing in the NBA. It was about hope. It was about the idea that even in the darkest times there was still a chance, that there was still a possibility that things could get better, and maybe, just maybe, Michael Jordan could help him believe that. With a deep breath, Marcus clicked send, and in that moment, as he closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, he knew that he had done everything he could. Now, it was up to fate. A mother's strength and the unexpected response. The following morning, Sarah Thompson woke up with a heaviness in her chest that seemed to follow her throughout the day. The night before had been another restless one, her mind racing with thoughts of Marcus's surgery and the overwhelming stack of bills that had become a permanent fixture on the kitchen table. She had fallen asleep with a prayer in her heart, clinging to the hope that somehow, something would change. But when she woke, the reality of their situation hit her all over again. She was running on empty, mentally, emotionally, and physically, but she had no choice but to keep going. As always, she got up early, quickly pulling on her uniform for her shift at Target. She needed the hours more than ever. The manager had cut everyone's schedules due to the store's declining sales, and every penny she made counted. Marcus was still asleep when she left, his crutches leaning against the wall next to his bed. She kissed his forehead gently, careful not to wake him, whispering a silent promise that she'd figure something out. She always did. The workday dragged on slowly, her hands moving mechanically as she rang up customer after customer. Her mind was elsewhere, distracted by the worries that were piling up faster than the groceries on the conveyor belt. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, the reality of Marcus's injury and their mounting debt hovered over her like a storm cloud. Every time she heard the beep of the scanner or the chatter of customers, she felt like she was drowning in a sea of uncertainty. By the time Sarah's shift was over, The exhaustion had settled into her bones. She grabbed her coat and trudged to her car, her body aching, her mind numb. As she drove home, the same thought circled in her head. How was she going to afford the surgery? How could she get Marcus the help he needed when every option seemed to lead to a dead end? The more she thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. When she arrived home, she was surprised to see Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, his crutches beside him. He had a notebook open in front of him, his handwriting neatly scrawled across the page. At first, she thought he was doing homework, but as she got closer, she realized that it was something entirely different. He was writing a letter. "Hey, baby," Sarah greeted him softly, trying to hide the concern in her voice. "What are you working on?" Marcus looked up at her with a hesitant smile. "Just some stuff for school," he said quickly, closing the notebook and pushing it aside. But Sarah could see the faint trace of worry in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. He was trying to be strong for her, just like he always did, but she knew her son too well to miss the signs. "Marcus," Sarah began, sitting down beside him, "you don't have to hide anything from me. What's going on?" Marcus paused, clearly hesitant, before finally speaking up. I wrote a letter." "To Michael Jordan." Sarah froze. The name hit her like a wave, her breath catching in her throat. "Michael Jordan?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why would you write to him?" Marcus bit his lip, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know, I thought maybe if he knew what's going on, maybe he could help." Sarah's heart clenched. She knew that Marcus had always idolized Jordan, had always believed that the basketball legend was more than just a player. He was a symbol of hope. She had told Marcus about Jordan's struggles, how he had been cut from his high school team, but had fought back harder than ever to become the best. She had always used Jordan's story to inspire Marcus to keep going, to keep pushing, no matter what. But this was different. Marcus was reaching out for something more than just inspiration. He was reaching out for a lifeline. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the quiet desperation that had taken root inside him. "Marcus," she began softly, taking his hand in hers, "I don't know what to say. You're asking for help from someone who has no reason to care about us. I don't think we can expect anyone to come and save us." But Marcus looked at her, his expression determined despite the tears that were threatening to spill. "I know, Mom, but what if he does? What if he could help? He's been through things too. He knows what it's like to struggle." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her heart aching as she looked at her son. She knew what it meant for him to ask for help, to put himself out there in such a vulnerable way, but she also knew that he was right. Michael Jordan had been through setbacks and challenges, and if anyone understood the value of a second chance, it was him. And so, despite her own doubts, Sarah smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, if you really think he can help, then we'll send the letter." She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if Michael Jordan would even read the letter, let alone respond, but she knew one thing. Her son had hope. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah realized that maybe, just maybe, she had hope too. Later that evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the letter Marcus had written. As she read his heartfelt words, a deep, painful ache settled in her chest. She could feel the weight of every word, the raw emotion behind each sentence. Her son was reaching out, not just for help, but for a chance, and it hit her harder than anything else had. She wasn't the only one fighting for their future. Marcus was fighting too. And so, as Sarah sat there, holding the letter in her hands, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, no matter how impossible things seemed, she would keep fighting. She had to, for Marcus, for their future, for the dream that she would never let go of, no matter how dark the days became. A new beginning. The days following Marcus's letter were filled with uncertainty. Sarah went through the motions of her daily routine, work, errands, and the constant balancing act of keeping their small world from falling apart. She'd never been one to sit idly by, waiting for change. But with each passing day, the weight of their struggles seemed to grow heavier, the odds stacked further against them. There was no denying that they were running out of time, out of options, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were stuck in a never-ending cycle of disappointment. But even as the tension in their home grew thicker, something had shifted in Marcus. He had become quieter, more focused, as if a new energy had taken hold of him. His letter to Michael Jordan had been a shot in the dark, a desperate attempt to claw back the hope that seemed to be slipping away with every failed attempt at finding a solution. And yet, there was a quiet sense of resolve in him now, as if he knew, deep down, that he had done everything he could, and that whatever happened next, he would be ready. Sarah, too, had changed. Though the doubt still lingered in the corners of her mind, there was a subtle shift in her spirit. She had spent so many years fighting, so many years giving everything she had without asking for anything in return. But in the days after Marcus sent his letter, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of the fear and trust that things could be different. She didn't tell Marcus, but she'd started praying again. Really praying. She hadn't done it in years, not since the days when she first became a single mother, when life had been so overwhelming that she couldn't see beyond the exhaustion. But now, as she watched Marcus struggle with his knee, as she saw the determination in his eyes and the quiet courage with which he faced each day, Sarah realized something profound. It wasn't just about the surgery or the bills. It was about believing in something greater than themselves. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to keep fighting, to keep hoping. Then, on one particularly exhausting evening, as Sarah returned home from work, her mind still spinning with the endless list of things to do, she noticed something different. There was an envelope on the kitchen table, a thick one that stood out against the usual stack of bills and notices. She didn't recognize the return address, but her heart skipped a beat as she saw the name on the front. Michael Jordan. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? Could this really be the response they had hoped for? She quickly tore open the envelope, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Marcus," it began, "I was deeply moved by your letter. I know what it's like to face setbacks and challenges. I've had my fair share of doubts, and I know how hard it can be to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I want you to know that I believe in you. I believe in your strength, and I believe in your dreams. You've shown a determination that many only dream of, and that is something I admire." Sarah's heart swelled as she read on, her eyes filling with tears as she absorbed each word. The letter wasn't just a response. It was a lifeline. Michael Jordan had read their story, had understood their struggle, and had chosen to offer more than just words of encouragement. He had taken action. "I've arranged for your surgery to be covered, and I want to make sure you have every opportunity to continue pursuing your dreams. Keep fighting, Marcus. Keep believing, and remember, you are never alone in this." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she held the letter in her hands. She sat down slowly, the weight of it all crashing over her. Michael Jordan, the man who had once inspired Marcus to dream bigger than anyone else, had stepped into their lives and made the impossible a reality. Sarah didn't know what to say, didn't know how to express the flood of emotions that rushed through her. But one thing was certain: this wasn't just a moment of relief. This was a turning point. For Marcus, the news came like a dream come true. When Sarah showed him the letter, his eyes went wide, his disbelief turning to joy as he realized what had happened. He had always admired Jordan from afar, but never in his wildest dreams had he imagined that the legend himself would offer to help. It wasn't just the surgery, it was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to chase those dreams once again. The days after the surgery were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Marcus's knee was slowly healing, and he began the long road to recovery with a new sense of purpose. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had been. With each step, he could feel his body getting stronger. The future, once so uncertain, was now full of possibilities. And through it all, Sarah stood by his side, her heart full of gratitude for the second chance they had been given. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The bills were still there, the work was still hard, but they had been given something far more valuable: hope. Michael Jordan's unexpected act of kindness had restored not just their faith in the future, but their belief in the goodness of people. In that moment, Sarah realized that sometimes, when you least expect it, the universe aligns to give you exactly what you need, just when you need it most. As Marcus worked through his physical therapy and slowly regained his strength, Sarah made a promise to herself. No matter how many challenges lay ahead, no matter how many times life tried to knock them down, she would keep fighting. For Marcus, for their future, and for the belief that dreams, no matter how far out of reach they seemed, could always come true if you never stopped believing. Sometimes, all it takes is a small act of kindness to change someone's life forever. Michael Jordan's response to a mother's desperate plea was more than just a gesture of generosity. It was a reminder that even the biggest stars can have a profound impact off the court. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the power of hope.